Ladies, gentlemen, and my often forgotten, but certainly not by me, DPS enthusiast, welcome to the channel and welcome to my new Magic DPS guide, 2023 edition. In this guide, I'm going to be going over the gear that I currently use, ability prioritization and which abilities are good and not, and different rotations for if you don't have an FSOA, if you do have an FSOA but don't want a 4-tick, and 4-ticking rotations as well. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get right into this guide. The gear used with the Magic combat style has actually slimmed down a little bit. Some items have been changed out, others deleted entirely, but it's pretty straightforward as far as gear is concerned. Since the rework of the FSOA, there's no longer a penalty for holding the dual wield items, so Channeler's Ring has seen a comeback just to help out with G-Conk spam, and since the additional effects have a charging requirement of 9 seconds for you to get the additional effects, switching between this and Reavers is not honestly that ideal, so most of the time I'm just going to be camping Channeler's Ring. Tier 92 dual wield is still best in slots, so just get that whenever you can honestly, and the perks on it are P6 AS1, AS4 E2, and this is so when you swap to something like a shield or a defender, you still have aftershock on the main hand so you can keep your stacks, and don't have to have weird aftershock combos on any of your shield, you can have full on shield perks. Now in the case of defender, you actually want E4 R3 because defender is basically just another offhand, and with defender if you want a barricade or something like that you would use a turtling swap, but for standard shields like your T90 or your arcane you can just run kind of the standard best in slot stuff. There are technically better combo perks for the arcane. I know some people have like 4 or 5 different arcane spirit shields with different perk combos on it. I just have absorptive 4 to keep things simple. The tier 88 here is just a roaming swap. Now with the popularity of dual wield coming back because it's no longer penalized by FSOA, I could see things like a lunging or a flanking swap coming back into rotations. However, I currently don't have examples of those as lunging is rather niche, and since I do 99% solo content and I'm kind of lazy when it comes to walk under flanking, a flanking swap is not exactly at the top of my priorities. However, if you have either of these swaps, I would keep them as they are more beneficial now. Now, as far as the FSOA is actually concerned, this is kind of just standard perks on it. I have P6 R1 and Aftershock 4 Equilibrium 2. Now on the Inquisitor, I don't have P6 R1, I just had a leftover gizmo and went ahead and tossed it on there, and I honestly forgot it was there, but I'll end up switching this out after this video is done. But you would want to ideally go for P6 R1, Aftershock 4 equal 2. Now if you're on more of a budget setup, P6 E4 will work perfectly fine for your dual wields, and things like C4 R5, Impatient 4 Mobile, these are all relatively straightforward to go for. They cost a little bit of GP, but they aren't too terrible to go for, and they are worth their weight in gold, as far as the fact as they are best in slots. Now on the legs, I just have Enhanced Devoted 4, and I do have Biting 4 on here. Yes, Biting 4 is pretty expensive, however, it is a guaranteed perk, so if you just happen to do a lot of Araxer, you could just Iron Man yourself Biting 4, or honestly, you just do a bit of ED2 and run through the dungeon for a while, and you'll build up the GP just fine. GP per hour is up quite a bit for everyone in this game, especially the med level PVMers, compared to what it once was, so it shouldn't take more than a couple days or maybe a week or so, depending on how often you have to play, to get Biting 4 even on your more budget-minded gear. And the best part about Subjugation is that when you're ready to upgrade to say Tectonic or something like that, you can literally just disassemble the gear because it should be level 9 by the time you're done using it, and you'll get your gizmos back. However, make sure it is at least level 9 when you go to disassemble it, because Subjugation bottom and top I think are what, 10 mil each, so it's not too much of a loss there, and you immediately have your gizmos ready to go for the next set of armor. And honestly, this armor can do just about every single boss in game and will hold you over just fine until you go for something like Tectonic, at least the tier 90 variant. Now as you might have noticed, I only have one EOF here, and that is for Gothic Staff. Keeping the rework in mind for FSOA, ABS EOF is no longer really worthwhile because the recursive effect was removed. Now recursive effect meant that you would cast an ability and that ability could crit, giving you an auto attack, but that auto attack could also crit, giving you a second auto attack. That part where the auto can crit giving you a second auto attack has been removed from the game, and that was the strength of ABS EOF, is it was 5 hits and 5 ticks, and it didn't matter so much what the damage of those hits were, it was just the fact that you could get a bunch of autos from it that were all going to hit 5 and 6k damage, and that is what made the ABS EOF or Armadyl Battlestaff EOF powerful. But now since they've reduced its damage essentially by half, it is no longer really worthwhile, plus the hits that are coming out are not going to be hitting that high in the first place, so using 50% adrenaline for 5 hits that are going to do anywhere from 1.7 to 2.3k damage, and potentially proc out some hits that are going to maybe do 3 to 4k damage is honestly not too worthwhile, so we're just kind of stuck with G-Staff spam for now. Hopefully in the future, when we get some T95 Duel Wields, they'll have a nice spec that can be used as an adrenaline dump or something like that, but only time will tell. Now the only differences as far as armor perks are concerned on my best in slot gear is I have Impatient 4 Devoted 4 instead of Impatient 4 Mobile, and I have Invigorating 4 with Mobile on it. That's where the Mobile went, and my Biting 4 does have Hoarding on it. However, you could combo your Biting with whatever you want. You could combo your Biting with Mobile and have Invigorating comboed with something else. You could put on something like Crystal Shield 1 with your Biting 4 to help out with a little bit of damage reduction. There are many combos for perks that are considered best in slot and secondary perks and whatnot, so I will leave a link in the description below to a wiki page that showcases basic and advanced best in slot perks, and it has it for all combat styles, so feel free to check it out. And on some of these perk combos, if you happen to click on the probability, it'll show you the actual combo. For getting it, it'll tell you whether you need Invention Potion or not, and it'll tell you the percent chance of other perks, and it'll also tell you what level you need to be. And as you can see, there are a lot of combos here for Biting 4, so if you just click on one, like say Reflexes, say you wanted this, it'll give you the material combo and everything here, and the link for this wiki page will be down below. Now the only other gear that I have equipped that's of note is Grim is still best in slot, being that FSOA still is based off of crit chance, so we still want to go for the crit build using Grim and Calg Demon. And I'll just go ahead and hover over my rune pouches. The color of the rune pouches doesn't matter, but the runes inside are nice because they give you all spells that you need. If you need to look at those in more detail, feel free to pause the video. And other than that, I just have Elder Overload because it's the best overload. Blessed Flask is just for prayer renewal since we'll be using Calg Demon. The Hybrid Zuck Cape is not necessary if you are just magic camping, however it is nice because it makes preset management a little bit easier if you have all the combat styles, but if all you have is the magic Zuck Cape, then go for it. And if a boss is poisonable, then Cinderbanes are always going to be your best option, but if a boss is not susceptible to poison damage, then Enhanced Carapact Wrist Wraps are probably going to be your best bet. It has a nice effect where if you use Dragon Breath while Combust is active, all of the remaining hits will hit at once, so it can be kind of nice if you're trying to get a quick phase in or get to a certain HP cap or something. It can be helpful. And Blast Diffusion boots now have a use again, being that Detonate is back in the rotations. Before, Detonate was only really used outside of your Sun rotation, but now it can be pretty much used anywhere, so Blast Diffusion boots are a little bit more important. The actual spike that goes on them from Raksha is probably not so important. That's probably going to be one of the last upgrades you get, as well as like upgrading your armor to T92, but they are still upgrades nonetheless, so at some point you should probably get them. But I would make sure, you know, you have like your weapons set up and your perks set up and everything else kind of squared away before you go worrying about something like a boot upgrade. Now that we've gone over the gear, let's go ahead and talk about abilities and ability prioritization and all of that fun stuff. Now, as far as basic abilities are concerned, a few things have changed. Rack is no longer a completely terrible ability. You can use it as a filler if necessary. And ice racking is still very powerful. It's not quite the 188 it used to be, but it's a 170, so at places you can take advantage of this by using Ice Barrage. At places you can take advantage of this, go ahead and do it. G-Conk is the bread and butter of all rotations. I believe it's about 120, maybe 130 mil on the GE. However, normal mode Carapac is quite the pushover of a boss, so you could do it until you get one yourself. Dragon Breath is a solid ability, however its cooldown is a bit long, so you kind of have to play around it, but overall, very strong ability. Corruption Blast is another very strong strong basic ability that Magic has, and it does quite a bit of damage, and it's also very nice for AoE targets. So say you're in an elite dungeon and there's a big group of mobs, it is definitely nice to be using Corrupt Blast on cooldown as much as you can. Combust can be a strong ability, however, it is only really worthwhile if the target is walkable to get the double damage effect. However, if it is a static target, that's when you could use something like a lunging swap to boost its damage, and if you're using the wrist wraps because the boss isn't poisonable, Combust can be nice because the wrist wraps will give a 25% damage increase to Combust. Impact on its own is kind of a weak ability, however, if you're using a flanking swap, it can become very strong. I mostly just use this as a filler ability. If my autopilot in my brain kind of takes over and I accidentally use all of my abilities without doing any sort of proper rotation, I do use Impact as a filler. However, it is not exactly ideal, but it does get the job done. Although Rack is usually going to be a better option for a filler ability than Impact because it does do more damage on average. Greater Chain is expensive, but it is very strong when it comes to anything AoE damage wise. In Elite Dungeons or at Zuck, this ability is going to absolutely carry. With Coroming 4 used, it can hit up to 6 additional targets plus the one that you targeted for a total of 7 targets. And you can pretty much use any ability after that, and then all the additional targets that were tagged by G-Chain will take half damage from that ability. So say I hit Greater Chain on these and use an Omni Power, you'll see a big amount of damage here, and then it's half damage on the other ones, but it is still very, very strong for doing AoE damage. Greater Chain also works with things like Detonate, so if I charge it up here, you'll notice that the main target got hit and the G-Chain targets also got hit by a secondary hit, but Detonate will also still work and hit any targets that it normally would have. It also works the same with Tsunami. It will hit all of the targets that Tsunami would have hit normally, plus any of the G-Chain targets will take an additional secondary hit of half damage. It's kind of why G-Chain is expensive. I believe it's about 700 mil right now, but if you're doing anything with AoE clearing or multiple mobs that you want to deal with, G-Chain is invaluable. However, on its own, on a single target, the damage is the same as Impact, so you could use it in a pinch as a filler ability, but it's probably better to just stick with using Rack as your filler. Now, the other abilities I haven't really talked about are the stun variants, which is Horror and Shock. These do the same exact thing as far as stunning and binding a target as Impact and Deep Impact do, however, they will move a target one tile. Now, the number of targets they can move is kind of limited, being that if a target's too big, it can't be knocked back, and you get a chat message saying that this creature is too large to knock back. And these have some niche uses, being that they only stun a target, they also don't bind the target, so there are some very niche uses there. But other than that, they aren't really used too much at all. Now, the last couple of basic abilities are Magma Tempest and Sonic Wave. Sonic Wave now shares cooldown with Greater Concentrated Blast, so it's honestly a dead content ability, and its variant Greater Sonic is honestly dead on arrival as well. It honestly isn't used in any rotations as of right now. However, Magma Tempest is still widely used. Most people use the targeted variant, so you would click it and you can cast it anywhere you like, and you can do this without an actual target, so you don't have to be targeting any mob for this to happen, so you can put this down before a boss spawns and it's already taken care of. I'm kind of lazy and just use the non-targeted version, but it's definitely better to use the targeted version for a couple of things. They're slightly niche, but you can use it to force out an auto attack, so on and so forth. Now, as far as threshold abilities are concerned, pretty much all of them are good to go. There aren't really any bad thresholds per se. Wild Magic is a solid threshold that you can use pretty much anywhere, and inside of a Sunshine rotation, you want to go for 2 of these. Deep Impact on its own is not the strongest, but it is still useful as a stun and bind, and if you're comboing this with flanking, it is a very strong ability. Asphyxiate is very strong, however, there are some caveats with it, being that it is a channeled ability, so most people will now cut off Asphyxiate after the second hit, or 3 ticks or 1 global cooldown. Basically, if you're just button button mashing, you're doing it right. Smoke Tendrils is the strongest ability post its rework, because it's now affected by things like Precise and Equilibrium and a couple other things, and it got a rework to where it still always crits. However, the damage is now actually progressive, and it ends in a Sunshine with almost like a 12k hit, so it is pretty much always worthwhile to press, as it is your strongest ability, but you'll only be getting one of these off per Sunshine rotation, and that's the only time I would use it because it does have a 45-second cooldown. Detonate has made a kind of a strong comeback. It was very useful before FSOA release as a threshold, however, with FSOA in its old state, it wasn't exactly ideal to use, but now that there's no dual wield penalty or anything like that, and 4-ticking is back in the rotation, Detonate is a strong ability nonetheless, and you'll be getting one of these off per Sunshine rotation. Now last but certainly not least are the couple of ultimate abilities that Magic has. Sunshine or Greater Sunshine, if you have it unlocked, is going to be the best one to use. If you don't have Greater Sunshine unlocked, you can just use a planted feet swap, either a tier 80 defender or some just offhand weapon or some low tier wand to get the 38-second duration, and you'll be using this pretty much off cooldown unless the boss forces you away and is doing something different, because it is the strongest ultimate that Magic has. Omni Power with the Zuck Cape is another very strong ultimate ability, as it now only costs 60% adrenaline with the cape equipped, and instead of one big hit, it fires 4 hits, so it will do a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. Its cooldown is also 30 seconds, so in some cases where you're not using FSOA, you can actually go for 2 Omni Powers in a Sunshine, and it is very powerful. Tsunami is a strong AoE ultimate that gives you a crit buff for 30 seconds, where every crit you strike gives you 10% adrenaline. This is the same effect that Meteor Strike and Incendiary Shot give, and you can bring the adrenaline cost down significantly with auto casting the Incite Fear spell, and with things like Ring of Vigor passive and the Conservation of Energy relic. Tsunami has a very low adren cost and is a bread and butter in any Sunshine rotation, as giving crit adren is always a nice thing to have. The more adrenaline you have, the better abilities you can use. The more adrenaline you have in general, the better your rotations can be. Now, a somewhat overlooked ultimate that Magic has is Metamorphosis. It had a pretty strong use, and it still does at Solak. In 5-man teams, people will use Metamorphosis to help nuke the elf in one cycle, because it is stronger than Sunshine. Sunshine is a 50% damage increase for 38 seconds, whereas Metamorph is 62% damage increase, but it only lasts 15 seconds. So this is useful in some niche situations where you're using magic but really need to get out some burst damage, like during the elf on Solak, or maybe at the end of a Zami kill during P7, Metamorph was used for a time there. I used to use Metamorphosis on Crystal 3 for Siru to make one cycle a little bit easier. However, that's not really the case anymore. However, the thing to keep in mind is whatever your auto cast is, it will change you into a certain element type of Metamorph. There are 4 types of Metamorph. When you hit it, there is the air, the earth, the water, and the fire. And you will only get the damage buff if you are auto casting the correct type of spell. So say you've been auto casting Exsanguinate and then you get the fire Metamorph when you start, you can either auto cast Exsanguinate or Blood Barrage and you'll be fine. But if you swapped over to like Ice Barrage or Shadow Barrage or an Incite Fear, you're not going to get the damage buff. Alrighty, now that we've gone over all of the different abilities that Magic has to offer, let's go ahead and get into some actual rotations. Say you're doing a Sunshine rotation and you don't have an FSOA, you just have dual wields. It would look a little bit like this. So what you can do before you go into a boss encounter and get your adrenaline is just come up to these dummies and then press a few abilities. And you can build up stacks on your Incite Fear and they will last 20 seconds, which should be long enough for you to get into a boss encounter. So then once you get to your boss encounter, you can just Sunshine, G-Conk, Dragon Breath, and hit a Omni Power. G-Conk into a Tsunami. G-Conk, Exsanguinate, swap over to Exsanguinate, and then just do some abilities. You're basically just going to be hitting G-Conk every 3rd ability. Go for a 2-hit Asphyxia. Be attendees. Do a G-Conk, charge a Detonate, release it with an ability, and then hit another Omni Power. A Wild Magic, and that's a rough example of what a Sunshine can look like with just Dual Wield camping. The main priorities to go for are 2 Omni Powers, 2 Wild Magics, a Tendies, and a single Asphyx. If you can fit the second Asphyx in, more power to you. I swapped over to Exsanguinate a little bit late. You can pretty much swap over after the first G-Conk, as your Insight Fear will have enough time to last till the Tsunami. And with Exsanguinate's effect, it gives extra damage on all of your basic abilities up to 12%, so that's 12% extra damage on your G-Conks, your D-Breath, your Corruptions, everything like that. However, if you press the Rack and Ruin button, it resets it and you have to build the stacks again, so that is something to keep in mind for your rotations. But again, typically inside of a Sunshine, you can use Insight Fear. You can build Insight Fear stacks before you go into a boss instance, and say you're like doing Raksha or something like that, you should have time to build up stacks, go into the boss instance, and then start up a Sunshine, and then just make sure your first G-Conk has Insight Fear still selected, so you rebuild the timer, and then you can swap over to Exsanguinate and start a Sunshine rotation off, and you are off to the races. Also, one side note, that rotation did use Adrenaline Renewal Flask. It does require a quite high Herblore level, however, I believe you can still get away with just using Enhanced Replenishment or Super Adrenaline Potions. I think you still can get the Omni Power off on the third ability, but I believe it also does require COE and the Ring of Vigor passive, so there are some scaling requirements for that rotation. However, they aren't too bad to go for, and you're going to need them for PVM anyway, so you might as well knock them out sooner rather than later. Now, say you have a nice setup here and you have FSOA, but you absolutely refuse to 4-tick. Now, it's not the end of the world if you don't want to 4-tick, however, you will be losing out on some damage, and I do encourage that people learn 4-tick because it will teach you much more about the combat system than any other combat style will, and really help you with building up the internal clock, understanding the actual tick system, and understanding what you can and can't do on a game tick, before a game tick, or after a game tick. It is somewhat difficult to learn, I won't lie, but once you wrap your head around the main concept of it and start to build up the muscle memory, it will come very naturally. And when I learned it all these years ago in 2017, I had just one of those aha moments where it just kind of clicked, it made sense, and then all of a sudden I felt kind of stupid for not understanding it sooner. But up until that point, it made absolutely no sense. But anyways, if you want to do a rotation without 4-tick, it would look something like this. And we'll go ahead and grab a Calg Demon because we want all the crit chance we can get. And you don't have to worry about building Insight Fear stacks here because we're going to be doing a Tsunami in place of where Omni Power would be, or one ability after, so we're not going to be able to get off to Omni Powers during this rotation. But anyways, here it goes. It would look something like this. We'll hit Sunshine with our A-Pot, G-Conk, D-Breath, Rack, Tsunami, swap to the Staff and Spec, swap over to Exsanguinate, G-Conk, Wild Magic, 2-hit Asphyx, G-Conk into an Omni Power, and I'll just go ahead and hit a G-Staff. And here I'm just going to hit a double G-Staff before I go into a G-Conk, charge a Detonate, release it with Tendies, into a Wild Magic, into a 2-hit Asphyx, into another G-Staff. So the basic premise here, as my PC decides to take off into space with its fan. Alright, now that my PC has calmed down a little bit, you want to go for 2 Wild Magics, 2-hit Asphyx, and then 1 Omni Power, 1 Tendrils, and 1 Detonate inside of your Sunshine rotation. As soon as you have the 5 Insight Fear stacks built up, you can swap over to Exsanguinate at any time, and the sooner, usually the better. Now, if you want to get super sweat, once the Insight Fear stack is about to wear out, you can auto-cast to it for a couple of abilities. Usually it's going to be like a G-Conk, or maybe sometimes it's a Threshold, and then swap back to Exsanguinate because the hit that comes out with Insight Fear can crit and give you an extra FSOA proc. So it's something to keep in mind, but it is something that is slightly annoying to keep track of. And basically you're just hitting G-Conk every third ability and trying to time it so after G-Conk you're using things like Wild Magic or Omni Power or Detonate, because the crit effect that G-Conk has for the next ability ability will work with any of these. And then for any filler adrenaline, just use your G-Staff EOF accordingly. Again, we don't have any other adren dumps right now that are really worthwhile. ABS is dead content at this point, unless it receives some type of update. And for any magic updates, I will be making follow-up videos, so keep that in mind. But I digress. But after that, you can pretty much stay on Exsanguinate until you need Insight Fear again on the next Sunshine, because we always want our G-Conk to be doing as much damage as possible. So last but certainly not least is the 4-tick rotation for a Sunshine with FSOA. Now I have to put a disclaimer out of I do not do the most ideal rotations. I kind of just take the basics from what I remember way back when and combine it with some of the rules for doing a Sunshine rotation in general. However, I'm sure there is someone out there with a much more optimized rotation that is going to do damage. However, like all of my videos, this is just what I have found to work so far, and I'm just providing my single data point for you all to use as you see fit. Alrighty, anyways though, a Sunshine rotation would look something like this. We'll go ahead and press Sunshine. Target cycle into a G-Conk D-Breath Rack. Auto Nami into a Staff Spec. G-Conk into a Wild Magic. 4-tick or continuous 4-tick into a 2-hit Asphyx. G-Conk into an Omni Power. D-Breath. Auto G-Conk. Charge the Detonate, release it with a Tendrils, G-Conk into a Wild Magic, continuous into a 2-hit Asphyx, into a G-Staff, and that's pretty much rotation over. As you see, there's not too many 4-tick autos in there. There are ways to fit more of them in there with kind of different rotations. However, most of the time, I am usually still focusing on getting out abilities rather than trying to do as many 4-ticks as possible. And so I'm more or less just sneaking 4-tick autos in where I can. And my usual 4-tick is going to be Blood Barrage. That's just what I've always done for the healing effect. Being that FSOA doesn't give the healing effect anymore from spamming out a bunch of auto attacks and us just being able to auto cast Blood Barrage, that effect no longer is there, so any type of heals now we can get, I will take. So let's talk a little bit about after Sunshine rotations and kind of what I do in between Sunshines. Now this is going to be boss dependent on what I do, but in general, it would look something like this. Alright, so we're coming up to the tail end of a Sunshine, and I do happen to have high adren, so I would just go into another Wild Magic Asphyx, regardless if I had Sun or not, assuming it was on cooldown. Maybe into something like a G-Conk, an Auto Tempest, into another G-Conk, maybe a G-Staff. Here I'm going to swap over Insight Fear early, like an auto ability into a G-Conk. Maybe like an auto corrupt, and then I already am going back into another Sunshine rotation. So you want to just get off like maybe a G-Staff or two, maybe another Wild Magic and Asphyx. You're not really going to have time for another Detonate, although sometimes you will. Sometimes you'll have the time and adrenaline for another Detonate, and maybe even another Omni Power. Being that they're both 30 seconds, they should come off cooldown if you use them fast enough inside your Sunshine, to where you can use them on the tail end and it's still going to be perfectly fine. However, usually in between suns is where I'm more likely to use my 3 bleeds, being, you know, Corrupt Blast or Magma Tempest or even Combust, and typically that's what my rotations look like. Now, as far as actually how to 4-tick, I'm going to make this a separate video explaining the ins and outs and whatnot, but I didn't want to add it into this one as it is already running kind of long, so keep your eyes out for a 4-ticking guide in the near future. However, for this guide, that's all I have for you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments below, but without any further delay, let's go ahead and roll that outro. Ladies, gentlemen, and I did not forget about you DPS enthusiasts. Thank you very much for watching. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I will see you next time for the next video. Peace.